Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Agile Network India April events. And moving further with our next session for the day, which is a panel discussion hosted by Jaipur Chapter. It is on the topic how to manage scope creep. I would like to invite Manoj, Megha, Praveen, Pankaj, and Ranjit on the camera, and we would love to hear about you. So before we begin our panel discussion, I would like to thank our founding sponsor, Innovation Roots, which is a leading consulting and training service provider helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneers of niche publishing services and is well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. For more information, please visit www.innovationroots.com. And I would also like to thank our sponsor, Agile, which is a product offering from Tata Consultancy Services Limited. It is a purely cloud-based enterprise agile planning tool along with DevOps capabilities. Enterprises can use Agile to adopt agile practices or scale across multiple Scrum and Kanban teams using enterprise scaling frameworks such as SAFe, Disciplined Agile, Less and More. You can try out Agile for free for up to 20 users for 1 year by signing up at agile.io, or you can also reach out to us for any inquiries or exclusive product demo. Check out the Agile page on Agile Network India website for more information. All right, so now we'll begin the panel discussion. Over to you, Manoj.
Hello everyone, I am Manoj Khanna. I have been working as business analyst with Decipher Zone software for about 3 years, and within this time period, I have worked on building marketing platforms and affiliated marketing platforms, investment instrument analysis, and trading platforms. Thank you.
Okay, I'll begin, everyone. Hi, everyone. I am Megha Agarwal. I work as Director PMO with the Curtis Corporation, and I have 12 years of working experience in product and team management. I have worked with varied domains, started with banking, logistics, and now I think my focus is in entertainment and cruise industry. So my domain expertise currently lies within the cruise industry.
Hello everyone. So basically I'm Ranchi. I'm working as a senior business analyst in 9 Hertz India Private Limited. Talking about myself, I'm result-driven business analyst with 5.5 years of experience in software industry. My expertise includes leadership, client handling, team handling, agile methodologies, delivering programs and solutions that empower a team, company, and customer to meet and exceed desired expectations. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Praveen Kumar, and I am working as a principal consultant cum product owner in our enterprise services private limited. I have more than 13.5 years of experience across geographies in the US, Scandinavian region, and India. And I have worked in multiple domains like railroad, transportation, manufacturing, healthcare, e-governance, and retail. And I'm working in Agile from quite some time, and I have experience in various facets of the product lifecycle, like product management, requirement analysis and elicitation, solution conceptualization, and designing. That's all I said. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Pankaj Telyani. I am working as a project manager, the team manager in DotSquare's Technologies India Private Limited. I am having around 18 plus years of experience in this industry. Currently, I'm handling, you can say, working on different domains like finance, travel, real estate, CRM systems as well. In our day-to-day life, we are using Agile almost, and we are working in product as well as service-based projects. Thank you.
So welcome all of you to Jaipur Chapter's event today. So software development is a tedious process that has been evolving over the years. Nowadays, almost everyone across the industry has been working with agile practices to adapt changes on feedbacks over iterative demos of working pieces of software. The uncontrolled urge of businesses to have an edge over competitors with changing market dynamics has often led to scope creep and derailed the development teams, which resulted in missing out timely product deliveries. So we will be discussing how we can manage and mitigate such scenarios and how we can minimize the scope creep in this panel discussion. So I would like to welcome all of our panelists here. So without a further ado, let's start our discussion. So guys, I would like to ask you that what according to you is scope creep and the primary reasons according to you that cause it? Megha, you like to?
Yeah, so I guess I'll kickstart this discussion with a slightly controversial statement. Agile is definitely adaptive, and I think the basic fundamental of Agile is that you need to be open to feedback and changes. But I also strongly feel that that does not mean that you do not have an idea of your product vision or your product, maybe say MVP milestone, right? So even in agile world, you do not kickstart a project without understanding what you really want to achieve with your product, right? Which is defined as product initiation or product vision. So to broadly define what scope creep could be or what we experience in our daily life is, for instance, if you're planning a 3-month project increment, right? Like we follow program increments. And if I've planned the increment of my product for next 3 months, if a stakeholder or a client or a customer comes somewhere in between with an unannounced change and request for that change to be done on an immediate basis, that is when we consider it as a scope creep, right? To give you a quick example, for instance, I am developing a login module, and I have planned 3 months in future, though login would not take 3 months, so it might be a bad example. But yeah, I have planned login module, and I have planned for next 3 months, and a client or a stakeholder somewhere in between comes and tells me that, Megha, you are giving me a Facebook login. Now give me a LinkedIn integration as well. If they tell me they need it after 3 months, it is not a scope creep. It is simply an enhancement that goes to backlog and it gets groomed and prioritized, right? That's the whole purpose of Agile, that your stakeholders have these constant capability to groom and prioritize your backlog. But if that stakeholder comes in between of my PI and tells me that I need it in your next sprint, that is when it becomes a scope creep for your team, because your next sprint is estimated and resourced according to what you already committed. And this new change was not part of your next sprint plan. So, in a very broad category, I think that is scope creep, and it is subjective in terms of how you are planning your product and portfolio at times. And I think quickly answering the second part of your question, which is how does it happen, right? What are the sources of scope creep? I think it could be anything. Biggest example right now is environmental factors. So my organization works for products in cruise industry, in cruise domain, which unfortunately is in crisis right now because of what's happening with COVID, right? The industry is at halt for last 1 year. There is no permission from legal or countries to sail. Now, within last 1 year, we have got multiple change requests from either, health authorities in America or a European community, or maybe our IT stakeholders, because that is the need right now. You have to evolve. The cruise industry has to adapt to an enhanced health standard so they could get back to sail, right? So scope creep in that terms could be anything. It could be environmental, it could be evolving market. Sometimes it could be missed requirement or a requirement that became obsolete before it could go to market. So a lot of different things could cause to scope creep, I think.
Thank you, Megha. So you have shed a lot of perspective about the scope creep and the practical scenarios. So, Praveen, I would like to know your perspective on this. What are the points that you would like to add? What Megha just said.
Thanks, Manoj. So, as Megha that shared that wonderful insights about that scope creep, so I would like to add a few more points. So basically, a scope creep, in my point of view, is any change or any continuous or uncontrolled growth in the project scope after the project initiation. So it is also referred as a requirement creep, feature creep, and even kitchen sink syndrome as well. So I will give you a brief about kitchen sink syndrome. So in kitchen sink, that you have defined the scope that these are the dishes that you wanted to wash. So that is your scope right now. But while you are executing that task, you are washing those dishes. Meanwhile, that your family member will put in glass, bowl, or any other dish in that kitchen sink. So that additional that dish that has been put in the sink is the scope. Uh, And coming to that second part of the question, there can be numerous regions by which that scope creep can happen. It can be from client side as well. If a client or stakeholder is not clear in the requirements, then that can also cause a scope creep. And it can be from that Scrum team as well, and from product owner and business analyst team as well. If the requirements are not clear, and it can also from that technical architecture team as well. So I will give you an practical example for the technical architecture. So in one of my project, that in manufacturing domain project, initially that evaluation of the technical stack, that a D3 JS library has been suggested for the charts, but and even though that all the use cases were covered, but maybe a case has been missed, by which that one of the chart is not supported by that D3JS library. So that's why that we again again move to that another library, that is C3JS library, and all the charts that are customized based on D3JS library are now again has to be reworked. So that also causes scope creep. So there can be various regions like that improper estimations, and impact analysis is poor, then that can also cause a scope creep. So
Thank you, Praveen. So Ranjit, what's your take on this?
Well, already Megha and basically Praveen has just given insight in a better way. But I would like to add and basically define in this particular scope and creep in a very simple way. First of all, we should understand that this scope creep is basically coined with two terms, scope and creep. So we need to understand basically what is scope. For example, the extent of what a project will produce, that is called product scope, and the work needed to produce it, that is called project scope. Now, if we go for the word creep, basically it is slow deformation under constant pressure at load. This is what layman language definition of this particular creep means. Slowly, because of some constant pressure is there at some load, that particular thing, that particular load has deformed. So same thing happens here in IT industry as well, because scope creep means adding additional features or functionalities to a new project requirements or work that is not authorized or that is not agreed upon that particular scope. So that becomes scope creep because it is deforming the original nature of that particular scope. So I think this is what actually can say in layman language we can understand scope and scope creep. Now talking about the other part of the thing, like where what are the primary reasons of basically scope creep. So we can understand by the example of Megha and Praveen that there, I mean, it is majorly, you can say, if I bullet points I can share, that is lack of clarity and depth to original specification document, and then allowing sometimes, you know what, we allow direct unmanaged contact between client and team participants. That also basically it becomes a cause. And obviously sometimes customer tries to get extra work on the cheap, so that is also one of the reasons. Talking about scope creep where you do it yourself because of lack of foresight and planning. So that is, I mean, as a BA, we also are responsible sometimes. So the thing is like poorly defined initial requirements is the main cause of scope creep.
Okay. So since Megha, Praveen, and Ranjit has also mentioned that uh, about the what according to them is scope creep and some of the reasons that are responsible for this and the stakeholders. So now I would like to know that who is responsible for scope creep and which are the key stakeholders that are behind this. Megha?
So so who is responsible for scope creep? As I think Ranjit very nicely kind of answered that it could be poor initial requirement capturing, that maybe the business analyst did not understand the product vision right, or the requirements were not documented well. So while in translation from stakeholder to a BA or a BA to a Scrum team, the requirement didn't get translated properly. It could be various reasons. It happens in various stages of your project life cycle. Sometimes you miss a requirement right at the requirement gathering based, and sometimes during the deployment is when you realize that, a requirement is obsolete by now. So, and I also mentioned in my previous answers that in my case right now, for last 1 year, environmental factors or evolving market or adapting to changing standards of our industry is what's causing scope creep. Who is responsible to kind of manage it or deal with it nicely? I think that kind of ownership falls with project manager or product owner. I would say main responsibility falls with the product owner. A product owner is the one who has to understand the product really well, needs to have the documentation on point. So every time such kind of change request comes across, they should be able to go and check if it's a missed requirement, if it's a bug, or if it's a proper change request, and they are responsible to do a very thorough impact analysis. If the impact leads to that you have to redo what you have done already, and you have to redo the architecture, or it might delay your milestones, then the product owner has to have the negotiation with business and put it in the backlog. But if the product owner thinks that this change request is really beneficial for the increment that I'm about to deliver to client, and it is something that I can accommodate in the buffer that I kept during my initial planning process, then they can decide to kind of try and squeeze it in. But again, the ownership, in my opinion, is with product owner to drive the negotiation or the conversation between the stakeholders and the Scrum team.
Thank you, Megha. So, Praveen, according to you, which are the key stakeholders responsible here?
So, Manoj, I think that there is no single source of from where that scope keep can happen. So there can be numerous sources. So even it starts with the stakeholder. If stakeholder is not clear in their requirements, that can cause scope creep. And if I talk about product owner or business analyst team, and if that product backlog is not groomed well enough and the stories are not properly defined, that can cause scope creep. Even the product management team uh, and project management team as well, for not anticipating that scope creep in early stages, that also can cause scope creep. And similarly for Scrum team as well, if that estimations are not proper, or if the Scrum team is not following the best development practices, that can also cause a technical debt or scope creep. And similarly for technical architecture, if that technology stack or framework and architecture is not well defined, that can cause that scope creep. Yes, but I agree with Mehan that that management of scope creep, that ownership lies with the product owner, but there can be various sources by which scope creep can happen.
Thank you. So, Pankaj, Megha and Praveen has told us who a lot of key stakeholders and the team members who are responsible for scope creep. So, do you have any addition other team members who are also responsible for this?
Basically, they both have already covered all the, you can say, stakeholders who are responsible. But here I would like to, you can say that the scope creep can be defined as internal or external. So if we say about that team members, managers, stakeholder, product owners, they all are responsible. And if we segregate these into categories, then I will call like in internal, we take team members as a scope creep creator over here. How come? There are within the team members, we can say that the scope creep comes when customer pleasing scope creep happens. What does this mean? This happens when you or your team members start adding or enhancing the features to make the project look better and convince your client. This is also known as gold plating sometimes. So it is not worth if it means your project misses the deadlines or what you promised. Let's take an example. Like during the development of the project, one of the project team member comes and say that we can add an extra functionality, let's say a video to a page, which is actually was not required by the client. And you did the scope gold plating and you add the video on the product detail page. And when we deliver this particular page to the end client, then end client, you can say, compares that this is not the feature which was asked, because it is not, you can say, up to the mark according to the page speed. So it denies to accept that. So this is called gold plating, where we have, you can say, spent too much time, and at the end it was not, you can say, accepted by the client. Second is called hope creep, where team members are always, you can say to the project managers, like the project is, you can say, on the schedule, whereas on the actual side the project is not on schedule. So this is called hope creep, and project manager thinks that yes, at the end of the day the project will get completed on as per the schedule. The third call is effort creep. In effort creep, we will say looks like wheel is spinning in the mud. They are doing efforts and efforts and efforts. At the end, there is no such progress at all. So these are the few examples where team members are creating the scope creep. Apart from the, you can say, managers or the end client, which generally to be, you can say that these are the scope creep creators.
That was a great example, Pankaj. So on the same grounds, I have a thought about that. In Agile, how do you identify that it is not a feedback to adapt change? That just like what happened to Pankaj, that it is not a feedback to adapt change, but a scope creep. How would you identify that,
Yeah.
Pankaj?
Sometimes we received feedbacks from the client mentioning that this is obvious thing which should be in the software. Or sometimes client says that this should be the default feature of the product or a website. So being as a project manager or the developer, we first always have to refer this feedback or change request with the statement of work or project or the product destination document, where we define all the features there. Here I would like to take one real life example which happened in the recent days with me. I was creating an mobile application for Android and iOS, where we are giving the feature to, you can say, shoot the video to the end user and can then upload that shooted video onto the server. So this particular part was working properly without any bugs. So whenever end user tries to, you can say, play that shooted video, then it starts buffering. Earlier days, you can say 10 years back, when we try to watch the video on the YouTube, we all have faced the buffering problem where a loading circle was keep running, and few minutes back then we will be able to see that video. So here the problem was that, so client mentioned why it is happening. The problem over here is client says it should run smoothly as it is working on the YouTube. So here I mentioned to the client that in the scope we never defined that we are going to use the streaming server over here. If the streaming server would be there, so definitely the cost of that streaming server was also mentioned on the statement of work, and that should have been purchased by you. So at that moment client easily agrees, yes, this is the feature which I was asking is not in the scope of the document. So here client says this is a feedback, but here being as a project manager, we are not adapting this as a change. It is simply a scope creep for us.
Okay. So, Megha, what has happened to you in this scenario?
So talking from my day-to-day experience, I think the two tools that we on my team that we use to understand the difference between a feedback or is it a scope creep or not is the stories or the sprint demo, right? So we use the tool called Jira. I know everyone must be aware about it. So we try to document all our requirements in form of stories, functional or non-functional stories. And when we plan our sprint or when we plan our PI, we make sure that every story has a very solid acceptance criteria, and then acceptance criteria is reviewed by stakeholders and is reviewed by Scrum team. So everyone who's involved in the project has to agree on that acceptance criteria, and that is their chance to kind of edit it or add stuff to it. Once team has estimated that acceptance criteria and story and has committed for 3 months in advance, the scope is frozen now. Any change that comes to it is a scope creep. So I think acceptance criteria and stories are a great tool to figure out if what you're getting from client is actually something you missed, your team developed it wrong, or it is simply a change request. And I think apart from this documentation process, I think another great process is sprint demos. whenever you have a product increment delivered to a client environment, if you can host a demo for it to your end users or your IT stakeholders, it's a very good forum for them to give you the feedback. And it's also a very good opportunity for them to realize if they missed giving you a requirement, right? It is not, no stakeholder is perfect, correct? Or no business is perfect. They are humans. There is a possibility that they did not think of a use case at a time, or they missed a requirement at a time. So these sprint demos are a great opportunity for Scrum team to showcase their work and for stakeholders to give their early feedback and realize if they have missed a requirement or missed a scenario. So that is also a place where a scope creep can be identified. And a very quick example of what I think team needs to do to realize if it's a scope creep or not. So for instance, like Pankaj mentioned, we are developing few Android apps, right? And our test team usually tests those Android apps on Android 10 version, because that's what most of the Android phones had. But now we got a feedback that when that application was run on Android 11, there were some features that were not working well. Now, that's not exactly a scope creep, right? As a product organization, your product needs to adapt to incremental Android software. That's how mobile phones work. So I think there is a very fine line sometimes to figure out what's a feedback, what's a scope creep. But if your client expects you to make sure your product runs on Android 11, that's not a scope creep. That's something that your product had to, be designed in a way. But if the client comes and tells me that during if you are sending a notification and they say, no, I want the notification pop up to stay on forefront and not go in a background because of a particular reason I have in my mind, and that's how not your notifications are designed, then it could be a scope creep, because they're asking you to develop a customized pop-up or a customized notification that you had not planned so far. So in a very basic language, I think that's how you decide if a particular feedback is just a feedback or is a scope creep that needs to groomed and prioritized and estimated.
Thank you, Megha. So, Praveen, I believe you must have faced some these kind of scenarios as well. Would you like to shed some light upon it?
Sure, Manoj. Yes, basically these kind of scenarios happens in day-to-day activity of a product owner. So basically in this kind of situation, yes, that I agree with Megha that user story is our strongest tool, where that all the solid acceptance criteria is written, and those acceptance criteria needs to be reviewed and signed off from the stakeholders. But still, that once a feedback has been received, then that feedback and sometimes that stakeholders say that okay, it is an obvious requirement to you, it should be as part of the user story. Yeah, so in that case, basically that feedback needs to be analyzed thoroughly, and that impact analysis needs to be done, and it needs to be estimated. And if it is very small, then I think we should include that change uh, in the additional buffer that we kept in the release planning, because every time that you cannot say no to the client as well. And if the impact is very high, then obviously you should say no with proper reasons. But there are some situations as well where you cannot say no to that, even that impact is high. So I will tell you one of the practical example that happened to me. That for one of the client that we were working in PI planning session, that we include the stakeholder, and we have given that overall that scope idea of the complete release. But I think in second sprint, that client was talking to a prospect, and there was a trial run was going on with that specific prospect, and that specific prospect asked for a new feature or new requirement, and without that feature, I think that deal can be closed, and we can have that $1 million losses for that. So that's why that specific requirement came in, and to by understanding that criticality and priority of that requirement, we the module that we were implementing as part of that release, we commented the code that we already implemented, and we pushed that complete module into the next release, and we worked upon that specific module because it was quite critical. So basically, you need to make a balance with the customer satisfaction by considering that feedback, analyze, and obviously sometimes you say no to the client as well because the impact is so high.
Thank you. I am finding all of your responses very intriguing, and I think our audiences are on the same line too, because we have been getting a lot of questions around this topic. And I wish we were not on the very thin lines. We had a very tight schedule for this event. So, without further ado, let's jump to our next question. So, which change control processes do you prefer to implement for managing and mitigating scope creep? Pankaj?
Yes, Manoj. So if we talk about the definition of the scope creep, the easiest way to describe scope creep is to say that it is adding features and requirements that are beyond the agreed upon product scope, right? Now to manage or mitigate, we have to, you can say, keep following points into the consideration. Like number one, write a detailed scope at the project's onset. Ask as many questions as you can to clearly understand the client's goal with the project. So the questions like, what are the goals of the project? What will make this project a success? What can we do to ensure the success? How will you measure success after the completion of the project? Another point, identify all the stakeholders and understand their goals. Do it before you start working on the project. Identify their visions, their interests, their requirements, their involvement within the project, and plan your project accordingly. Another point which we can say that needs to be considered, that is, plan a room for the changes in advance. It's very sad, but it's true that not all the risk can be foreseen and prevented, and modifications are inevitable. So that's why change control and the management procedure should be clearly defined and documented, and there should be a possible room of changes or the amendments beyond that. Or we can say, take action as early as possible. So identify and address, you can say, possible scope creep at the early stages. As the new suggestions comes from the client or the sponsor, update your all the documents or the feedbacks and pass those updated document and the feedback to the teams after you agreed on those changes. You have to understand when to say no. It's tempting to implement all the features and the functions, but it's rarely good for the project delivery time that we should say no to the client for unreasonable or the time consuming changes. Or I think Megha has already said a few minutes back that there are some tools in the market which we can use, like Asana or Monday.com or the Kanban boards or the Agile. So for our, you can say, day-to-day activities, where you can say mention all the, you can say, requirement over there, and then we can refer those requirements while developing the modules.
So a slight tweak to what Pankaj said. Pankaj, I prefer to say not now instead of no to client, because sometimes, no doesn't work well. So what I have been taught from my mentors is, try to say not now. And not now is taken much more positively than no in agile world. So just a learning, yeah.
Sometimes we have to say no, sometimes we have to say not now. And not now, what we will convince, what we are trying to convince, that yes, definitely we are able to do that, we are considering this request, but for the timing we can put this particular request to the phase 2 or for the later stages.
Yeah, true.
No, and no, not now itself is a skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Praveen, please shed some light upon it.
Yes, agree with Pankaj. There can be that numerous that control processes or best practices by which we can minimize the scope creep. But yes, we cannot bring down scope creep to zero. And the that primary practices that I think is basically we should involve our client throughout the product lifecycle, and we should keep our stakeholders in agreement and on same page. So for that, we have followed one of the practice that is not part of that agile work, but yes, that was remain successful for our project. So even that we include stakeholders in PI planning, and we describe the complete scope of that release. But along with that, before each sprint, also that we do a pre-planning session, sprint pre-planning session around 3-4 days back, 3-4 days previous to that sprint planning session, and in which also that we describe the complete scope that we are covering as part of that next sprint, and by which the stakeholders remains in agreement. At the time, if there is any change or if there is a prioritization issue, then that story can be moved out and any other stories can be picked from that product backlog. So, and this practice remains successful in our project, and by which that stakeholders remains in agreement what we are planning in the next sprint. And along with that, I think prioritization is that another region that we need to do the prioritization of the product backlog time to time and definite interval. And besides that, already Pankaj and Megha said that we should also know how to say no or not now to the client. So I think these are the best practices that we can follow to minimize the scope creep.
Thank you, Praveen. So our audiences has a lot to ask. So now, since we have discussed about how you can manage and mitigate scope creep, but one of the points that I remember from Megha and Pankaj's responses that there are some points where you need to balance customer expectation. So my next question to you is that what are the 2 or 3 key pointers for you that you would suggest that you can use to balance customer expectations while managing the scope creep? Megha?
Uh, that's a tricky question. I don't think I've been very good with my customers, but but I will try to answer. You know, I my personal approach, again, this is not coming from a book or a certification. What has worked for me in last 1 year, which has been very tough for the industry I work with, is being honest with the customer. You know, tell them, call spade a spade, call a change request a change request. Don't beat around the bush. If your homework is solid, if your requirement gathering was solid, you have enough data points to kind of tell a customer what they're asking for a change request. What they're asking for is a change request, and once that is agreed upon, I think the process is pretty simple. I usually try to ask them for a trade-off. I go with my impact analysis, and if I think the change request that they're asking for is a very risky CR and is going to impact the stability of product that has already been developed, I say it that way. Most of the times customers do agree. They don't want to unstabilize a working version of a product because of a change request. But if I genuinely think my team can absorb that change request with some trade-off, like Praveen mentioned, in exchange of something that is on low priority, I try to have that honest conversation with my team and with my stakeholders. Just as a product owner, sometimes I try to provide an open forum to stakeholders and Scrum team, and I know it's risky to put them in touch at sometimes, but for me personally, it has always worked, because a stakeholder can hear from horse's mouth. They hear from developers what risk that change request might bring, or they understand that team has a risk appetite at this point and they are ready to absorb that change request. So again, that's something from my practical experience. Agile practice might not recommend this, but this is something that has worked for us in last 1 year.
Thank you. Ranjit, what's your take on this? What would be the 2 or 3 key pointers here?
Well, after analyzing the whole, you can say, session, I would like to say to my audience that obviously we need to understand that there should be a balance between budget, time, and scope. For example, this is budget, and this is basically time, and this is scope. Now, if this scope is deformed in some way or the other, we need to keep this budget and time also, like proportionally we should be able to manage this. Now if we are able to manage this, I think we can balance customer expectation as well as our internal expectation too. Now for this thing, for especially what I understood from this whole session, that like Praveen, Megha, Pankaj, that we should have room for changes I mean, we should have room for changes. We should always be ready for the changes, because the thing is, like in Agile, we cannot say that no, it is not possible. Now, for that, we should be ready for taking action as early as possible, as mentioned by Pankaj. And basically, you can say, as Megha and Pankaj both agreed that yes, I mean, someone say that we should be justifying for saying no. And as Megha said, that we should be not now. I mean, some way in other make it that can be a tricky way to handle things, but somehow we should be able to justify that yes, within this particular scope, within this particular budget, within this particular time, it is not possible. So I think this is the takeaway which we should understand.
Thank you. Pankaj, what would be your 2-3 key pointers?
Yeah. So what I will say that how to balance the, we can say, customer expectations while managing the scope creep is, first of all, check the feasibility and its impact on the module or the architecture of the requested change. If it is doable and it is going to take some minutes or less than hour or so, then I think we should go for that. But this, keep remember, but this should not be an exercise and should not be repetitive throughout the project, because at the end when we will club all these different you can say hours or minutes, sometime it makes, you can say, days or sometime months. So we should control this particular point. The another point which I think should be, if a change request is quite big and it is going to take number of days, and the new change request is not essential feature of this current release, then try to convince the client to put this change for the next phase of the project. I think this was the point which Mega mentioned earlier, that this is what not now, right? After going through the third point, I will say that after going through the client's feedback, if you come to know that this change is very much essential for the current scope of the project and it was missed during the estimation phase, then accept this and try to implement if the change is not big in terms of man hours. Here we are not, I'm not saying that accept this change request which you missed earlier of 10 days or 20 days, but it is a small change and you think that it is very much essential. So definitely try to adapt you can accept this and try to get it done. Fourth point, or the last point from my side, is that if the provided feedback or change request is a simple replacement of the existing module, client is not asking any change or it is not asking for any scope creep, you can say. So two, you can say manage the client customer's requirement. Client is simply saying just replace this particular thing with the this thing, so definitely we should go for it. If I take an example here, I'm creating a WordPress website and client has asked earlier to implement the LinkedIn login process. So now client is saying that instead of LinkedIn login, just replace with the Facebook login. So WordPress generally works with the plugins. So we have both the plugins for LinkedIn and Facebook. So we are simply replacing LinkedIn with the Facebook. So it is not going, you can say, take too much of time. So we should do this for the client. So in this way, we can say manage the client expectations as well as the scope. So this is from my side.
Thank you. Thank you, Pankaj. So we are about to end this session. So I would like to take just one question from here. Mr. R.C. Goyal has asked that in agile ways, aren't we supposed to uh, accept the changes from customers? Aren't those changes welcomed? So I need a crisp answer for that so that we can hand over the mic to Shreya quickly.
I
Megha, would
have
you
read
like to
his
answer?
answers. I have read his answers as well, and I think he has answered his own question. Yeah, so I think his inputs are very, 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 very valuable. and I've been trying to read through them. But yeah, I think changes are welcomed, just that changes have to be structured and planned in some sense.
Thank you. So, guys, if since we are
Megha, can I come personally? I have
yeah,
really understood your approach, and I'm trying to look back what ways it used to be 2000 or before, or even up to 2005, when there used to be a concept of requirement gathering, requirement analysis, documentation, design, and structure, and then come to development. And then maybe you send all this document to the customer, get signed off, and feel happy. But when you deliver it, can be something different. And if you remember, maybe it is much later on. That is why the role of BA crept in around 2001-2, because BA means you understand business of the customer. So in that scenario, you have to foresee all what can come in his business vis-a-vis delivery you want to make to address his business. And that is why the thought of agile ways came. Give delivery in part by part, which is not too much of effort put in by you. Listen to him, which may mean changes in current one, sometimes even earlier one, or later on also. That is the beauty of agile ways of working. And that is why it is expected that all your deliveries are so interlinked and structured that changes are easily manageable. That is my thought. I'm not a software person. Please give me benefit of doubt.
sir, apologies to interrupt, but the next session is about to start. So, I would like to hand over the mic to Shreya.
Thank you so much, Manoj, and thank you so much, everyone. It was a wonderful session. We look forward to such more sessions by Jaipur chapter in future. Thank you.